The rain was relentless, hammering the streets of Brooklyn like it held a personal grudge. Ezra Cole stood under the awning of a shuttered bodega, his hoodie soaked through, watching the world blur into shades of gray. At 28, he felt like he'd already lived a lifetime of mistakes, each one a stone dragging him deeper into a sea of regret. He hadn't always been this way. Growing up in a small Ohio town, Ezra had been the kid with dreams bigger than the cornfields. Dreams of painting murals that spoke truths no one dared to whisper. But those dreams had crumbled under the weight of his father's fists and his mother's silence when he came out at 17. He'd fled to New York City, chasing freedom, only to find loneliness in its crowded streets. Now his days were spent hustling as a barista, his nights lost to cheap whiskey and the ache of a heart that felt too heavy to carry. Tonight was worse. His roommate, Javier, had kicked him out after a screaming match over unpaid rent, leaving Ezra with nowhere to go. The rain seemed to mock him, each drop a reminder of how far he'd fallen. He pulled his phone from his pocket, its cracked screen flickering as he scrolled through contacts. No one, not a single name he could call without shame swallowing him whole. He shoved the phone back into his jeans, his breath hitching as the cold seeped into his bones. Across the street, a neon sign flickered. The Anchor, a dive bar he'd passed 100 times but never entered. Something about its warm, amber glow felt like a lifeline. He crossed the street, dodging puddles, and pushed through the heavy door. The air inside was thick with the scent of beer and fried onions, the hum of conversation a stark contrast to the storm outside. Ezra slid onto a bar stool, his damp clothes clinging to him like a second skin. "What'll it be?" the bartender asked, a woman with a shaved head and a kind smile. "Whiskey. Neat," Ezra muttered, barely meeting her eyes. As she poured, a burst of laughter erupted from the corner of the bar. Ezra's gaze darted toward it, drawn like a moth to flame. A man sat there, maybe 30, with curly auburn hair and a green sweater that looked soft enough to sink into. He was surrounded by a small group, his hands animated as he told a story, his laughter bright and unapologetic. Something about him, made Ezra's chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. The man glanced over, catching Ezra's stare. His eyes, a warm hazel, held a spark of mischief. He raised his glass in a mock toast, a grin spreading across his face. Ezra looked away, heat creeping up his neck. He wasn't here to flirt. He wasn't here to feel anything at all. But the man didn't let it go. He slid off his stool and sauntered over, his confidence as effortless as his smile. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," he said, leaning against the bar. "Mind if I buy you another drink to lighten the load?" Ezra blinked, caught off guard. "I'm good," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Fair enough." The man didn't push, but he didn't leave either. "I'm Theo Navarro, and you look like you could use a friend tonight." Ezra snorted, staring into his glass. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," Theo said, his tone light but sincere. "But I know what it's like to feel like the world's caving in. And I know a good whiskey can only do so much." There was something in Theo's voice, something real, unguarded, that made Ezra pause. He glanced up, meeting those hazel eyes again. They weren't just warm. They were searching, like Theo could see the cracks in Ezra's armor and wasn't afraid of them. "I'm Ezra," he said finally, the words feeling like a confession. Theo's grin widened. "Nice to meet you, Ezra. So, what's got you out here looking like a drowned rat?" Ezra hesitated, He could lie, brush it off, keep the walls up. But something about Theo's openness, the way he leaned in like he genuinely cared, made Ezra want to be honest. Got kicked out of my place. No job, no money, no plan. Just nothing. Theo didn't flinch. Been there, he said, nodding. Last year, I was sleeping on my sister's couch after my startup tanked. Felt like the end of the world. But you know what? Sometimes the end is just the start of something else. Ezra wanted to scoff, to tell Theo that cliches wouldn't fix his life. But the earnestness in Theo's face stopped him. Instead, he took a sip of his whiskey, letting the burn ground him. "What do you do now?" he asked, more to keep the conversation going than out of real curiosity. "I'm a social worker," Theo said. "Work with kids in foster care. It's messy, but it's worth it. Helping people find their way out of the dark. It's kind of my thing." Ezra felt a pang. He'd spent so long in the dark, he wasn't sure he'd recognize the light anymore. "Must be nice," he muttered. "Having a purpose." Theo tilted his head, studying him. "You've got one too, you know. You just haven't found it yet." The words hit harder than Ezra expected. He looked away, his throat tight. Theo didn't push, just ordered another round for them both and started talking about something lighter. A ridiculous story about a kid at his job who tried to smuggle a hamster into a group home. Ezra found himself laughing, a sound so foreign it startled him. For the first time in months, the weight in his chest felt a little lighter. He didn't know Theo Navarro, but in that dimly lit bar, with the rain pounding outside, Ezra felt something he hadn't in years. A flicker of hope. The next morning, Ezra woke on a lumpy couch in a tiny apartment, the smell of coffee pulling him from a dreamless sleep. His head throbbed, a reminder of the whiskey and the late-night conversation with Theo. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and realized he was still in his damp clothes from the night before. Theo's apartment was small but warm, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in framed photos of smiling kids and vibrant street art. "Morning, sunshine." Theo called from the kitchen, his voice bright. He emerged with 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to Ezra. "You snore, by the way, like a freight train." Ezra flushed, taking the mug. "Sorry, and thanks for letting me crash." Theo waved it off. "No big deal. I wasn't gonna let you sleep on the street in that storm." He sat across from Ezra, his expression softening. "So, what's the plan today?" Ezra stared into his coffee, the question weighing heavier than it should. "I don't know," he admitted. "Find a shelter, maybe. Figure out how to get my stuff from Javier's place." Theo frowned, setting his mug down. "You're not going to a shelter. You can stay here until you're back on your feet." Ezra's head snapped up. "I can't do that. I don't even know you." "You know me enough," Theo said, his tone firm but kind. "Besides, I've got a spare key and a couch that's yours as long as you need it. No strings." Ezra wanted to argue, to tell Theo he didn't need charity. But the truth was he had nothing. No home, no job, no one to turn to. And Theo's offer, as overwhelming as it was, felt like a lifeline he couldn't afford to refuse. "Okay," he said quietly, "just for a few days." Theo grinned, like it was the easiest decision in the world. "Good. Now, let's get you some dry clothes and figure out how to get your stuff back." Over the next few hours, Theo proved to be a force of nature. He drove Ezra to Javier's apartment in his beat-up Honda, charming Javier's girlfriend into letting them in while Javier was at work. They grabbed Ezra's belongings, a duffel bag of clothes, a sketchbook filled with half-finished drawings, and a battered laptop. Theo didn't pry, but he lingered over the sketchbook, his eyes lighting up at the vivid murals Ezra had sketched. "These are incredible," Theo said, holding up a drawing of a phoenix rising from a cityscape. "You're an artist." Ezra shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Used to be. Doesn't pay the bills." Theo didn't push, but his silence felt like a challenge. Like he saw something in Ezra that Ezra had stopped seeing in himself. Back at Theo's apartment, they spent the afternoon sorting through Ezra's things, Theo cracking jokes to keep the mood light. It was disarming, how easily Theo made him feel at ease, like they'd known each other for years instead of hours. That evening, Theo dragged Ezra to a community center in Bed-Stuy where he volunteered. "You'll like it," Theo promised. "It's a safe space for queer youth. We do art workshops, music, whatever they need to feel seen." Ezra hesitated at the door, the sounds of laughter and chatter spilling out. He wasn't sure he belonged in a place like this, not when he felt so broken. But Theo's hand on his shoulder, steady and warm, nudged him forward. Inside, the room buzzed with energy. Teenagers painting murals, playing guitars, or just talking in small groups. Ezra's eyes caught on a boy, maybe 16, sketching furiously in a corner. The kid's intensity, the way his pencil moved like it was an extension of his soul, hit Ezra like a punch to the gut. "That's Marcus," Theo said, following Ezra's gaze. "He's been through hell, foster care, homophobic parents. But he's got a spark. Reminds me of you." Ezra didn't know how to respond. He wandered over to Marcus, who glanced up warily. "Nice work," Ezra said, nodding at the sketch. A bold, abstract figure that screamed defiance. Marcus shrugged, but his eyes softened. "Thanks. You draw." "Used to," Ezra said, the words catching in his throat. "Mind if I—" Marcus slid the sketchbook over. Ezra picked up a pencil, his hand shaking slightly as he added a few lines, softening the figure's edges into something more human. Marcus watched, his guarded expression giving way to curiosity. For the first time in months, Ezra felt a spark of something alive in his chest. Theo watched from across the room, a quiet smile on his face. When they left the center that night, he bumped Ezra's shoulder. "Told you you'd fit in." Ezra didn't reply, but as they walked through the chilly Brooklyn night, he felt a warmth he couldn't explain. Theo's presence, his unshakable belief in second chances, was starting to chip away at the walls Ezra had built around himself. For the first time, he wondered if he could find a way back to the person he used to be. Days turned into weeks, and Ezra found himself settling into a rhythm at Theo's apartment. He got a job at a coffee shop in Williamsburg, thanks to a tip from Theo's sister, Lena, who ran a catering business. The work was grueling, but it gave Ezra structure, a reason to get out of bed. Theo's couch became his sanctuary, the apartment a refuge from the chaos of his past. But it wasn't just the roof over his head that kept Ezra grounded. It was Theo, his relentless optimism, his ability to find joy in the smallest moments. They'd cook dinner together, bickering over spices, or watch old sci-fi movies, Theo's commentary making Ezra laugh until his sides ached. There were moments, fleeting but electric, when their hands brushed or their eyes locked a second too long, and Ezra's heart would race, torn between hope and fear. He wasn't ready to name what he felt. He'd been burned before, by lovers who promised forever and left him broken, by a family who'd turned their backs when he needed them most. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Yet Theo made it so damn easy, with his quick smiles and his quiet, steady presence. One Saturday, Theo convinced Ezra to join him at a pride event in Central Park. The air was thick with summer heat, the park alive with rainbow flags and music. Ezra felt out of place, his black t-shirt and guarded expression stark against the vibrant crowd. Theo, in contrast, was in his element, wearing a bright green tank top and chatting with everyone he met. He dragged Ezra to a fountain where a group was splashing each other, laughing like kids. "Come on, live a little," Theo called, scooping water and flicking it at Ezra. Ezra dodged, a grin breaking through despite himself. "You're gonna regret that," he warned, lunging forward to splash Theo back. The water caught the sunlight, sparkling as it arced between them, and for a moment, the world felt bright, weightless. Theo's laughter rang out, pure and unguarded, and Ezra felt something shift inside him, a crack in the armor he'd worn for so long. But the lightness didn't last. That evening, back at the apartment, Ezra's phone buzzed with a voicemail from his father. The voice was gruff, familiar in a way that made Ezra's stomach churn. "Heard you're in New York," his father said. "Your mom's sick, cancer. Thought you should know." Ezra sat frozen, the phone trembling in his hand. Theo, sensing the shift, sat beside him. "What's wrong?" "My mom," Ezra managed, his voice hollow. She's dying." Theo didn't hesitate. He pulled Ezra into a hug, strong and steady, and Ezra let himself sink into it, tears burning his eyes. He hadn't spoken to his parents in years, not since the night his father had called him a disgrace. But the thought of his mother, quiet, broken, but the only one who'd ever shown him kindness, slipped away was too much. "I have to go back," Ezra said, pulling away. "To Ohio. I need to see her." Theo nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "I'll go with you. You don't have to do this alone." Ezra wanted to protest, to say he didn't need anyone. But the truth was, he was terrified of facing his father, of seeing his mother fade, of confronting the past he'd run from. Theo's offer wasn't just kindness. It was a promise that Ezra wouldn't have to drown in his despair alone. They booked bus tickets that night, the decision made in quiet urgency. As they packed, Theo reached for Ezra's sketchbook, flipping to a drawing of a lone figure under a stormy sky. "This is you, isn't it?" he asked softly. Ezra nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Yeah, that's me." Theo closed the book, his hand lingering on Ezra's. "Not anymore," he said. "You're not alone in the storm now." The bus ride to Ohio was a blur of gray highways and restless sleep. Ezra stared out the window, his mind tangled in memories of his childhood home, a place of stifled dreams and shouted arguments. Theo sat beside him, reading a worn paperback, his presence a quiet anchor. Every so often, he'd nudge Ezra with a joke or a question, pulling him back from the edge of his thoughts. When they arrived in Dayton, the air was heavy with the scent of cut grass and distant rain. Ezra's childhood home hadn't changed much, a modest ranch house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. His father, Frank, answered the door, his face lined with years and bitterness. "Didn't expect you," he said, his voice cold. Ezra's throat tightened. "I'm here for Mom." Frank's eyes flicked to Theo, lingering with suspicion. "Who's this?" "Theo," Ezra said, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. "He's my friend." Frank grunted, stepping aside to let them in. The house smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, a stark contrast to the warmth of Theo's apartment. Ezra's mother, Diane, lay in a hospital bed in the living room, her frail frame swallowed by blankets. Her eyes, once bright, were dulled by pain, but they lit up when she saw Ezra. "Ezra," she whispered, reaching for him. He took her hand, her skin paper-thin against his. You came. Of course I did, he said, his voice breaking. Theo stood back, giving them space, but his presence felt like a lifeline. Over the next few days, Ezra and Theo stayed in a nearby motel, spending hours at Diane's side. She spoke of small things, her garden, the neighbors, the life she'd lived after Ezra left. She never mentioned the night he came out, the night Frank had thrown him out, but the weight of it hung between them. Ezra wanted to ask why she hadn't fought for him, but he couldn't bring himself to hurt her now. Theo was a quiet strength, helping with meals, talking to Diane about her favorite flowers, and keeping Frank's temper at bay with his easy charm. One evening, as they sat on the motel balcony, Ezra turned to him. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." Theo looked at him, his hazel eyes steady. "Because I see you, Ezra, the real you, and I know what it's like to feel like you're not enough. I'm not letting you go through this alone." Ezra's heart stuttered. He wanted to reach for Theo, to close the distance between them, but fear held him back. Instead, he nodded, the words "thank you" too small for what he felt. The next day, Diane took a turn for the worse. Her breathing grew shallow, her words fewer. Ezra sat by her bed, sketching her as she slept, capturing the lines of her face with a tenderness he hadn't felt in years. When she woke, she smiled at the drawing. "You're so talented," she murmured. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you that enough." Ezra's eyes burned. "It's okay, Mom. I'm here now." She squeezed his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm proud of you, Ezra. Always was." That night, she slipped away. Ezra sat by her side, numb, as the world seemed to collapse around him. Theo was there, his hand on Ezra's shoulder, grounding him through the grief. Frank stood in the corner, silent, his face unreadable. The funeral was small, just a handful of relatives and neighbors. Ezra spoke, his voice steady as he shared memories of his mother's kindness, her quiet strength. Theo stood beside him, a silent promise that he wasn't alone. But as they prepared to leave Ohio, Frank cornered Ezra in the driveway. "You think showing up now makes you a son?" Frank spat. "You're still a disappointment." The words cut deep, reopening wounds Ezra thought had scarred over. He opened his mouth to retort, but Theo stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "He's more than you'll ever understand, and he's not here for you. He came for her." Frank glared but said nothing, turning back to the house. Ezra stood frozen, Theo's words echoing in his mind. For the first time, he believed he might be worth more than his father's disdain. Back in New York, Ezra struggled to find his footing. The grief of losing his mother was a heavy fog, clouding everything. He threw himself into work at the coffee shop, taking extra shifts to keep his mind busy. But Theo was there, always there, pulling him out of the darkness with small gestures. A shared pizza, a late-night walk, a quiet moment of understanding. One evening, Theo invited Ezra to an art show in Bushwick, a pop-up gallery showcasing local queer artists. Ezra hesitated, his sketchbook untouched since Ohio. But Theo's enthusiasm was infectious, and Ezra found himself agreeing. The gallery was alive with color and energy, paintings and sculptures that spoke of resilience and joy. Ezra wandered through, his fingers itching to create again. "You should be here," Theo said, nodding at a vibrant mural of intertwined figures. "Your work belongs in a place like this." Ezra shook his head. "I haven't painted in years. I don't even know if I'm any good anymore." Theo took his hand, his grip warm and steady. "You're more than good, Ezra. You're brilliant, and you don't have to hide that anymore." The touch, The words, the unwavering belief in Theo's eyes. It was too much. Ezra pulled his hand away, his heart pounding. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, his voice raw. "What do you want from me?" Theo's expression softened, but there was a fire in his eyes. "I want you to see what I see. Someone who's been through hell and still has so much to give. Someone I'm falling for, even if it scares the hell out of me." Ezra froze, the words hitting like a tidal wave. He'd felt the pull between them, the unspoken tension, but hearing it aloud made it real and terrifying. "I can't," he whispered. I'm not ready." Theo nodded, his face a mix of hope and patience. "That's okay. I'm not going anywhere." The rest of the night passed in a blur, Ezra's mind racing. He wanted to believe in Theo, in the possibility of something real, but the fear of being hurt again held him back. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into sketching, filling his book with images of Theo. His laugh, his hands, the way he lit up a room. Each drawing felt like a step toward something, though Ezra wasn't sure what. One afternoon, Marcus, the kid from the community center, showed up at the coffee shop. He slid a flyer across the counter, an open call for a mural project at the center. "You should do it," Marcus said, his eyes challenging. "Theo says you're the real deal." Ezra stared at the flyer, his heart pounding. The idea of painting again, of putting himself out there, was terrifying. But Marcus's faith, Theo's belief, it stirred something in him. He took the flyer, nodding. "I'll think about it." That night, he showed the flyer to Theo, who grinned like he'd won the lottery. "This is your shot, Ezra. You've got this." Ezra wanted to believe him. He spent hours sketching ideas, losing himself in the flow of creation. For the first time in years, he felt like he was waking up, like the world might have a place for him after all. The mural project became Ezra's lifeline. He poured himself into it, sketching designs that wove together stories of struggle and triumph, of love and resilience. The community center's wall was his canvas, a blank space that felt like a second chance. Marcus and the other kids helped, their energy infectious as they mixed paint and shared ideas. Theo was there too, rolling up his sleeves, his laughter filling the gaps when Ezra's doubts crept in. As the mural took shape, a vibrant tapestry of figures rising from shadows into light, Ezra felt himself changing. The weight of his past, his father's words, his mother's loss, didn't vanish, but it became part of something bigger, something beautiful. The night of the mural's unveiling was electric. The community center was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. Ezra stood by the wall, his heart in his throat, as Theo gave a short speech about the power of art to heal. When the curtain dropped, revealing the mural, the crowd erupted in applause. Ezra's eyes burned, not with grief but with pride. Afterward, Theo found him outside, leaning against the building, staring at the stars. "You did it," Theo said, his voice soft but fierce. "You showed them who you are." Ezra turned to him, the distance between them feeling smaller than ever. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice raw. You pulled me out of the dark." Theo's smile was radiant, but there was a question in his eyes. "And now? What do you want now, Ezra?" Ezra took a breath, the fear still there but no longer in control. He stepped closer, closing the gap, and kissed Theo. It was soft at first, tentative, then deepening as Theo kissed him back, his hands framing Ezra's face. The world fell away, leaving only the warmth of Theo's touch, the promise of something new. When they pulled apart, Ezra laughed, a sound that felt like freedom. "I want this," he said. "I want us." Theo's grin was brighter than the city lights. Good, because I'm all in. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Ezra's mural caught the attention of a local gallery, leading to a small show of his work. He and Theo moved in together, their tiny apartment filled with laughter and late-night talks. The pain of Ezra's past didn't vanish, but it no longer defined him. Theo's love, his unwavering belief, had shown Ezra that he could rise from the depths of despair. One evening, as they walked through Central Park, Theo stopped by the fountain where they'd played months before. He pulled out a small notebook, handing it to Ezra. Inside was a sketch Ezra had done of them, laughing in the water, with a note in Theo's handwriting. Love wins always. Ezra looked at Theo, his heart full. You kept this. Always, Theo said, pulling him close. It's us. And as they stood there, the city alive around them, Ezra knew he'd found his light. Not just in Theo, but in himself. He'd nearly drowned, but he'd learned to swim, carried by love, laughter, and the courage to begin again.